Hi, I'm Paul Bevan. You're watching the Cloud Therapist channel.
Hello and welcome to the Cloud Therapist channel. I'm Richard Simon. So this is the Cloud State of Play, the last one for 2022. This is the December edition. As you can see, our attire for today is, shall we say, seasonal? So I'll have again with me Paul Bevan. Paul is the Director of Research for Infrastructure at Bloor Research. So let's say hello to Paul. Admire his top and get cracking.
Make the most of it. You'll see it once a year only, please.
Exactly.
Hello, Richard, and hello, everybody else.
I hope you're doing well, Paul. So thank you for being a sport and joining me with some appropriate attire for the season. Okay, so Paul, what we've decided to do for this one is actually pick on a number of sort of topics, not necessarily kind of the usual three things that we do. So we're going to focus on what did we say? We said M&A, so mergers and acquisitions, for one. We said we were going to look at outages in the cloud as a highlight. So maybe kind of doing a bit of naming and shaming there. A little bit of innovations in cloud and other sort of technologies that we've seen. Cloud winners and losers. That'll be an interesting one. I'm really looking forward to that one and your views on that. And then a kind of a general tech update. So some of those might be cloudy, some of them cloud related, and some of them maybe even non-cloud related as well. So without further ado, let's get cracking, Paul. So on the mergers and acquisitions, what caught your eye for 2022?
Okay, well, I've looked at sort of picking out some of the larger ones and drawing some conclusions as a result of those. So the first one I was looking at was Akamai buying Linode. So Linode as a infrastructure as a service provider, small to medium scale, but loved by the developer community, very high performance, price performance stats on Cloud Spectator reports every year, but very much a sort of, IaaS only type approach. And Akamai, obviously, with its sort of CDN, its worldwide reach from a CDN point of view. So it was an interesting coming together. And for me, that's sort of indicative of, defensive moves against the sort of major hyperscalers, to stop themselves, either both companies being driven down to the bottom on price. How do you put together something with more of a value add in it for customers, to make it, and obviously to protect their position against, the growing power of the major hyperscalers. And I think you can see that in a number of places where companies are looking at segments and saying, I can't keep competing with the big three or others, and it might not just be cloud. So I think there's quite a move to people taking some defensive moves to actually increase their sort of ability to provide a slightly wider set of services, maybe more higher value services, and stop themselves being driven to the bottom. So that was number one. Then I thought, which was an interesting one for me, it sort of caught my eye, was Oracle buying Cerner. Now, anybody who doesn't know, Cerner is one of the big healthcare systems out there. So, if you're running hospitals, US based, a lot of US hospitals run Cerner. It's a complete sort of, it's almost like an SAP for healthcare.
Right.
And so a couple of things. Firstly is, I think, and I've seen a lot of other activity in the market around people looking to buy into healthcare tech, healthcare technologies or healthcare systems, because I think, coming out of the back of the pandemic, and also with some of the developments we're seeing in biotech, there's going to be a real focus around this as a market segment. And Oracle moving in there is, you might think is odd, but I suppose it's, what you're starting to see again is more verticalization amongst, some of these people. Again, they can't compete at a platform level. They're finding it really difficult. They're trying to find appropriate markets to move into with more of a vertical feel. So it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. Cerner is effectively the SAP for hospitals.
Yeah.
and so we'll see how that one goes.
Interesting.
I quite like the sort of Microsoft buying Activision one, Activision Blizzard one, which was intriguing in one sense. I mean, this is, you can look at it a number of different ways. It's partly, again, hardware vendors buying software and content to keep their margins up. But content obviously so important in that section that it's they will go after it. And Sony came into the market afterwards with a much smaller buy. But I think you look across the piece. We've seen it in the streaming markets that content becomes king, and I think that's partly what's going on here. But it's an interesting one again, is that you're getting pressure on margins, I think, in the hardware only space, and for games companies. If you're in the controller market, that's all good and well, nice revenues, but my God, the pressure on margins, and where can they find the extra margin? And you think, well, they need the content, and that's, I think, what's behind that. It'd be interesting to get your view on that one.
Yeah, well, I mean, the update I had for you was that the FTC has decided to block that acquisition. Yeah. So that's what I read recently.
Late news.
Yeah, that's very just coming in. Just coming in now.
I missed that one. Yeah,
I know. So so that was very recent. I think it was like the last week or so I read that. I think the BBC News and various other outlets had it on. So the FTC is, and I quote, it was suing to block Microsoft. Whatever that means. So clearly, I think the lobbying that Sony has done for the against the acquisition is clearly working, and it's kind of got to the right got to the right people, got to the right ears, and it's been heard. And Microsoft, I think, immediately afterwards came out and complained that Sony Computer Entertainment, had been very vocal against the acquisition. And it seems to be focusing mainly around one IP, which is the Call of Duty franchise. So that's the main concern for Sony. And obviously the future of that is definitely cloudy, going kind of forward is going to be kind of even more cloud-based than it is at the moment. With the streaming services and things like that for game streaming and so on. So, Sony's sort of they've made a kind of their sort of complaints have been sort of everything from the quality of sort of future releases for the PlayStation platform, and the ports are going to be generic, and the performance of those, and maybe even and this is pure speculation on my side. I don't think Sony has mentioned this unless it's kind of behind closed doors or something and the right ears. But it maybe even kind of concerned that a lot of their sort of development techniques would be given away in order to make the Call of Duty game as best as it can be, it's kind of performant as it can be on the PlayStation platform. So if you're going to do that, you're basically giving away your secrets to Microsoft, right, to do that. I'm sure it's not that, but that could potentially be one of the sort of the complaints. So at least maybe it's kind of the thought has sort of occurred to them at some point. But certainly, I think Call of Duty seems to be the central focus concern for Sony, and kind of the longevity of that on the PlayStation platform, despite the reassurances by Microsoft that it will continue and they will continue to develop it.
Yeah, this is back to the age-old argument, isn't it, of vendor lock-in, and you have to buy a Microsoft device rather.
Well, we all know about that, don't we, in cloud, Paul?
Yes. So it's the age-old argument, isn't it? But again, people trying to block competition, give themselves an advantage in the market. These acquisitions all have an underlying reason, which is all about revenue and profitability. And how they see them doing it. There are my last one on my list, just to pick a few, was a sort of poster child for a sort of general topic I see happening, which is people buying into additional security features to round out their existing capabilities, and it was the Google buying Mandiant. Now, as we've talked about it, it's pocket money for Google. Loose change that they're actually putting into this, and they've made 2 or 3 acquisitions around the security space. But then, if you look into some of the small acquisitions going on of small startups, of real technology specialists in the security space, and I'm not a great, very knowledgeable about security. There seems to be an awful lot of activity around buying up extra security capabilities, and I think one of the challenges we've seen in recent years, and I think this just shows it again, is the fact that it's much easier to buy capability and expertise than to develop it yourself. Shortage of staff, cost of doing it, timescales to market, all those sort of things. If you can go and buy an existing set of capabilities and easily integrate them, that's a different issue in its own right. But if you can do that, you can save up to 2 years of sort of development time and cost in doing these things. And security has become, one of the hot topics, if you like, during 2020. So I think,
no, I think that's definitely picked up, and I agree with you with that on that trend. I think that's definitely happening. Now, the ones I had, I think it was only a couple more that maybe sort of I wanted to pick up on. So a company called OpenText acquired the British software company Micro Focus, I think for around $6 billion, according to the press release. If you're not familiar with Micro Focus, they're the owners of Novell, Borland, and up until recently SUSE as well, but SUSE got spun off as a separate organization. OpenText is, I think, Canadian, kind of based around information management, things like content cloud, ERP, business intelligence, cybersecurity. Not a favorite term of mine. Cybersecurity kind of reminds me of the 90s film Lawnmower Man, kind of cyber something, cyberspace. But anyway, so that was an interesting one. Micro Focus, of course, has kind of had a number of different labels, and it's I think the last acquisition that they did with HPE's software business was a bit of a struggle for them. I've not kept up with their fortunes sort of subsequent to that, but it's an interesting acquisition, and I don't know how they're going to fit in with OpenText.
No, I don't either. It's an old one in the sense that Micro Focus's whole strategy over the last few years seems to have been to sort of, never mind the quality, feel the width. I mean, they were sort of they say the HPE one was an interesting one. I mean, they have actually got themselves a better reputation, for example, in infrastructure performance management recently. I mean, they had a whole set of tools, but they took over a load of HP stuff. And they've actually started to improve their position there, unlike one or two other acquisitive companies in that section. But nonetheless, you look at their sort of lack of focus. I think Micro Focus is probably the wrong term for them. I mean, they were buying all over the place, and this seems to be in the same sort of ilk. You can't see where the real synergies are coming with this one, but hey, that's an intriguing one. We'll see.
It is an interesting one to look out for. See how they get on with that. And I don't know OpenText's sort of acquisition experience and prowess as well, so we'll see what happens. Now, the other one, which was very early this year, back on the 4th of Jan, was actually Atos's acquisition of CloudReach. Now, this is a favorite area of mine, as I kept on mentioning to a few people that I was being interviewed by last year, actually, where we're seeing a kind of a continued scramble by the more established global system integrators and kind of managed service providers and so on to buy these kind of more hip and trendy boutique cloud consultancies. So you've had Cognizant owns Contino, Wipro owns Capco, Accenture I think acquired recently Sentia, which is a Netherlands-based kind of cloud infrastructure service company. They do have another one which I've completely forgotten the name for, so if I do dig that up, I'll put that in the description of the video. And likes of IBM with NordCloud and whatever as well. So this is definitely a growing trend. This has been going on for a while, and I'm probably not even doing the category justice in terms of those kind of naming the acquisitions. But it's definitely a trend where you've got these more established players. They're just too expensive, too slow, too gray, for the DevOps crowd. So what do you do? Well, we can't play in that space ourselves. Let's bring in somebody who is already playing in that space, who is kind of jeans and t-shirts, not grey suits and blue ties or red ties or whatever. Let's get them to play instead, and then they kind of they can squeeze us into some of those services that enterprise needs.
I see it slightly differently than the sort of jeans versus the red tie or blue tie piece, which I get that, but as much as anything else, I think what they're trying to do is build up their cloud their transformation business or migration business, because they are slightly grey. They're coming from the legacy world, and therefore they've got probably all the same questions that most CEOs and CIOs have got in large enterprises. How do we do this? And these guys, a lot of them haven't actually done it. So to go and get companies that are much more aware of what it's going to look like at the other end, and therefore what's the journey going to look like. Yeah, absolutely. We see this over and over again, medium size, big size, right down into the ISV market too. Independent sales companies, with little applications of their own, thinking, God, I've got to go to the cloud.
Yeah.
And I need to take my customers with me. I'd better build some consultancy expertise. So, there's a whole service environment being built there. And again, back to some of the issues you mentioned earlier, lack of available skills and time to do this. Let's go buy something.
And the only one of the other reasons why I'd kind of painted it the way or described it the way I did was because I won't mention any names, but I know that sometimes the approaches that the boutique company, the boutique consultancy, is actually influencing the parent company that's acquired it, in terms of kind of how they operate, their costs, as well as their culture, crucially their culture as well. Yeah. Because in order to kind of do that type of work with these more, sort of newer organizations and newer enterprises, you have to be kind of a jeans and, t-shirts kind of approach to it. And it's kind of in a much more sort of relaxed than the old sort of, gray suits and whatever for doing services and things like that. So I think that's what kind of one of the reasons as well.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. And we'll see how this one plays out, because obviously I see a lot of that as, how do I make myself more relevant to enterprises? Yeah. You just said something which I hadn't really thought about. It may well be right, that actually do the big SIs want to go after some of these smaller startups in terms of delivering services to them? Interesting. Yeah. In which case, absolutely, the cultural issue is going to be huge.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, that's a real trick, isn't it?
Yes, oh my goodness me! Yeah, can you imagine sort of rocking up to a sort of digital native startup place, with your sort of men in very expensive grey suits going, yes, I'm telling you how to do this. Yeah, right.
Yes, the strappy grey suits. Okay, so the other one, sort of the honourable mention is the Broadcom acquiring VMware. I didn't actually see that coming. I don't know if there were any kind of rumors from your side that you saw that it was kind of going to happen.
Yeah, yes is the answer to that. You could it was sort of signposted, a reasonable way out, but it's still one of those curious ones. It's a bit like OpenText and
Micro Focus.
It's you sort of look at it and think, okay, the biggest challenge I think there will be a cultural one. Their two cultures are quite different.
Yeah.
Whatever you think of VMware, they are, culturally much more modern than a Broadcom, which has got not the world's best reputation when it comes to how it treats its customers.
Yes. Yeah.
And therefore, and there've been sort of lots of protestations that no, they're not going to sort of just milk it for the money they can get out of it, and all those sort of issues. But it is an interesting one. It was not, while you could hear it coming, it was still, noteworthy when it happened, if I can put it like that.
Yeah, it wasn't. I have to say, it wasn't like the OpenText and Micro Focus one. It wasn't on my radar, but it was interesting to see. We're going to have to move on. I think there's probably a lot more that we can talk about in the M&A, but we need to move on. So the second one was kind of around outages, and you had some people that you wanted to scold on this one, I believe.
Scold?
Telling off.
I think you could scold everybody. One of the things that's come out for me, when we got involved with the 1,000 Eyes Cloud report this year, and seeing what was doing that, was the fact that, outages are a fairly, common occurrence. Mostly they only affect, one or two services or a particular geography, and they're usually fixed within a couple of hours. So sometimes the impact is minimal. But I picked out a few. I mean, the one that probably had the most impact was Cloudflare. And they had a sort of fairly major outage. I think it took something like 19 of their data centers down earlier in the year. And the impact, and this is what I wanted to this is the interesting thing for me, is that when you, as an enterprise or any sort of business, you're thinking, well, I'm on AWS or I'm on Azure, and I'm well protected because they've got, lots of backup, and we've actually made sure that we're in a couple of regions or a couple of availability zones, so we're not so exposed, is that what I call the digital supply chain, and so Cloudflare, is a CDN and has a whole host of, for example, payments merchants on their site, who rely on that. So if you are a retailer, for example, and you're going through AWS and you think you're protected, but actually when you go out for the credit card check or the credit card transaction, only to find that the merchant you're using was on Cloudflare and you can't actually access that particular capability, then that's fairly impactful on your business.
Yeah.
So again, one of the things we're seeing with the cloud is that there's a digital supply chain you need to be aware of when you're looking at how your apps are put together and how your services are put together and how they use that. So you may say, hey, you may laugh when AWS goes down and you say, well, I'm on GCP, that's not a problem, until you suddenly realize that Cloudflare has taken out, all those sort of issues. So I think Cloudflare was an interesting one for me. And I'll come back to, the reasons why things go down. Microsoft Azure had a large-scale outage around, but it was sort of East Coast, so it was, but it took down large amounts of services around Teams and around Exchange, and so lots of businesses were going down that way, and that was down to what they call power fluctuations. I'm sort of dubious about it, to be honest.
Okay.
I'm thinking something else happened because power fluctuations. If power fluctuations are bringing your systems down, you've got a question mark around the real resilience of what they've got.
Some people might say that Teams going down is not a bad thing because they can avoid all those team meetings.
Yeah, but Office 365 is critical for an awful lot of people. And that O365 went down for the whole sort of Eastern.
I hope you had it installed locally. That's all I can say. If you got it on your notebook.
But again, and I think all these are starting to show that you need to have, one of the challenges we've seen is that people almost stopped thinking about the need for disaster recovery or backup or those. I'm going
to come to that. Yeah, go on.
Because I'm on the cloud. Why do I need that? That's their responsibility. And the answer is no, it's not. It's your responsibility to ensure that you've got the right backups in place. So I think, I just wanted to highlight a few of these. So, there was the Atlassian one that took down. Yeah, but that was the problem. There was the amount of time it took to get it back.
Yeah.
That was days. Some customers were without their service for up to 19 days, I think it was. Ouch. Yes, really, really bad. The Google Cloud one, I had Google Cloud as well having a problem, but that was, again, shows how you can get unusual things cropping up. This was actually only affected the sort of Asia Pac, Southeast Asia region, but they had undersea cables cut by accident. And you think, now they were able to reroute relatively quickly, but obviously had latency implications, and it took them a few hours to get it rerouted. So there's 101 reasons why things can happen. And all I wanted to highlight was, if you think you don't have to worry about your own resilience, your own disaster plans, your own backup plans, because you've gone to the cloud, these will tell you that you do need to have that, you do need to have thought that one through. But they have outages of some kind happen probably nearly every day. If you don't mind getting nightmares every night, go and watch the online availability maps that you can see on Thousand Eyes for both public networks and the cloud networks. It's fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, as you mentioned, sort of DR, and certainly for me, it's, when you have these kind of major outages, is the how good is your sort of DR strategy? How good is your sort of cloud architecture to cope with this type of sort of really major failures, which you can't necessarily do anything about. The only thing you can do is to switch somewhere else, go and do the same thing somewhere else in another region, or another cloud. So that again sort of raises a question about multi-cloud and so on,
Yeah.
as well, and whether that DR means you have to so let's say you're in kind of cloud A, and you're sort of for your for your line of business, your production stuff, and then cloud B is your choice for DR type of capability. Now, do you kind of move across? Do you DR all of your cloud A services, or just the essential ones where people don't start screaming at you because that service is not there anymore, you've lost it in cloud A? Do you kind of just move the essential ones to cloud B? So that's all part. It's not kind of a trick question. It's just saying you have to think about all of these things in your cloud strategy, and your DR has to kind of include that. And obviously, you need to test your DR as well, not just create and they go, there you go, I've got a DR, tick the box and get it signed up. Actually, you need to test it as well.
Yeah.
That's always useful.
Absolutely, it's always a good.
Yeah.
I think that's just a learning. Outages happen all the time. Some of them are worse than others. You need to assess the risks to your own business and have a real understanding of what the biggest impacts will be and how you mitigate against those.
Yeah, you mentioned supply chain when we were having a chat before the recording, but there was an interesting one that I probably want to pick up with you next year. Cockroach Labs have released a performance report on the public cloud. So they've looked at AWS, Azure, and GCP. So I'll be very interested to run through that with you maybe next year. We can maybe do a bit of a rant on that. But it's kind of to do with performance. So I don't know what they mean by sort of quote unquote performance exactly, but we'll have a look at that. I think that'll be interesting.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the third one, which is innovations. So some of the sort of favorites, most interesting innovations that we've seen for the year could be, as we said, kind of business ideas or technology or whatever.
I mean, I think, in your position as a CTO and a cloud native specialist, sometimes you're a bit closer to some of the technical innovations. The one that I came across quite recently, which just resonated with me, partly because you and I have argued about cloud versus HCI. It was a company called Sunlight.io, which is a British company. So that was interesting in its own right. It's got a company. The founder was a guy who developed Zen, the Zen hypervisor.
Yeah.
And sort of they've worked closely with ARM a few years ago to develop basically a sort of HCI software stack that would run in a sort of small footprint, small low power type environments. And so they've got this very innovative, HCI stack, software stack that will run on, and they've got strong relationships with people like Lenovo, and so that but it'll run on your existing hardware. But my point was that they sort of got to a point where you could run that sort of technology at what they call the far edge, rather than sort of the far edge, right out in a small retail location.
All the way out there.
All the way out there, yeah. I mean, I've just used it, far edge. I'm going with it, yeah, far edge. But actually, out in a manufacturing plant or at a base tower of a 5G cell, whatever, those base towers, anywhere like that, where you've got a remote location that needs dark ops, remote. But we had a great discussion with them around, is it really cloud or is it HCI? Because they call it distributed cloud. And I'm going, I'm a cynic about that. So we had an issue.
We're in agreement on that one, Paul.
But without spending the whole of the sort of hour talking about how they do that, and I've just written an article on it. So I'll maybe give you a link to it.
Oh, yeah. That'll be useful.
Is that it's brought me around to think that I can see this as how distributed cloud works. But that was interesting, and this will wind you up probably, was the sense that AWS Outposts and Azure Stack and things like that as a sort of cloud distributed cloud out there was too heavy for those far edge locations. That in the midst, somewhere between, in sort of regional offices or regional data centers, yes, that'll work, but not that you need in where you've got a small footprint. The whole stack was too big.
I could go with that. I could agree with that, because I mean, Azure, and again, I'm not up to date with this, so this could all be changed by now. But my understanding was that you had Azure Stack, and then you had Azure Stack HCI. So the HCI aspect of it should be HCI, as we know HCI, ought to be like the kind of the Nutanix type of sort of HCI. So and Outposts and Anthos and whatever. Yes, I could go with that, because those are supposed to be extending the public cloud services into your data center, or whatever you would call your data center, but not to an edge. An edge cloud, or edge computing type of thing. Yes, so I would agree with that.
Sunlight are pushing that right up that far, and it's quite innovative stuff. I mean, we could spend a lot of time talking. So I really like that. I thought that was good.
Cool.
But we were looking at the same time and came across PathR, which is spatial awareness AI.
Okay.
Really, really interesting.
How do you spell that, by the way?
PATHR.io.
Okay. Just to make it clear. Okay.
And where they were working with Sunlight, which is why the sort of two sort of came together, which was in using cameras and recognition of people's activity in the store, and helping them then. So for example, for staff in store staff, to interact better with them, because they could see somebody then who was, probably, was always looking at the same thing, scratching head, all those sort of things. It says, here, and they had some specific examples, but it was much more intuitive around the way in which you would drive an ongoing relationship with the person when they finally came to it, rather than the sort of rather the approach you get so far. I mean, you go into a tech store, and you either get somebody who tries to crawl all over you, or either ask the very bland question, "Can I help you?" The answer is no. This just sort of seemed to be a very interesting use of AI, of AI power and AI capability,
right,
at a local level. It just struck a chord with me, partly because I don't like being pestered in a shop. And if somebody comes up to me in a shop and says, "Can I help you?" But if they came up to me and said, "I can see you've been looking at that," and this, you think, okay, I'd have a different conversation. If they knew what we're doing, and they were using the AI to help them with those sort of things. They were doing flow management as well. You can just all sorts of things. But so I just thought those were a couple of really interesting ones. And then Neo4j was another one that came.
Sorry, you mean Log4j? The big massive vulnerability?
Yeah, I know, it's an interesting name to give a company, isn't it? When you then get a hack as well. It's in the same. I think Neo4j came first.
Okay.
Therefore,
we'll give them that.
They're probably a bit upset, but actually, I mean, for me, it was. Yeah, one of the areas I've been looking at has been the whole growth of this sort of idea of digital twins. The underlying requirement of that to have a decent graph database, and I think the whole topic of databases, which I used to think was really very boring, has got me quite exercised.
So 20-second description. What is a graph database?
A graph database basically is it shows connections. It builds connections almost automatically. Whereas a relational database, you have to give it all its context and all the pointers and everything like that.
Okay.
It's almost like the equivalent of a sort of data lake. You put all the elements, all the elements of the description of what it is you're looking at, and then it makes the connections between them. So it's very much more receptive to doing unknown links.
Right.
With a relational database, you've actually got to know what all the links are and build them in. Unknown link. That's the easiest way to describe. Object-oriented, and very easy to do the links. So you do build relationships
Right.
very, very quickly without having to know what they were beforehand.
Right. Okay. So that's Neo4j.
Okay, and
Cool.
so I'll stop at that point, because I think
Okay.
we could go on for all some of the tech updates. I'll bring up the other one that we talked
Yeah.
about.
So I mean, in this sort of innovations sort of category for me, I guess we have to kind of probably mention the metaverse, not to be confused with sort of super cloud or meta cloud. And in fact, when I looked up, I just put in the word meta cloud into search, and it's actually come up as a company that's based on, they do clouds based on OpenStack or something. So there's a whole bunch of confusing terms around that. But if we kind of stick to maybe metaverse, that's kind of the Facebook sort of idea of sort of doing that. And then things like NFTs, non-fungible tokens as well, kind of that sort of unique, being a technology based on blockchain and to a way to create sort of unique digital IDs basically for any content that you want to or resources or whatever objects that you want to create, and there could be sound, visual, whatever. So NFTs, that's the kind of thing. So certainly those are interesting. And again, I think for just for viewers to look at for, I'll be doing hopefully a series on blockchain later on as well, so next year I should say, in the short segment of the channel. So hopefully that should be coming out sometime, well, hopefully early next year. But yeah, this was an interesting, the metaverse, NFT kind of really picked up this year, and probably driven by platforms like TikTok and lots of sort of hype and some facts maybe thrown into that space as well.
I mean, I think the NFT one is really interesting in the sense that you can get beyond the hype of Damien Hirst, shredding his and burning his token. You think, that's good hype. It's a good, good for him.
I'm waiting for Banksy to create an NFT now. That would be interesting.
Well, yeah,
a Banksy NFT.
A Banksy NFT, but the reality, if we think about digital identities, if you think about difficult contractual situations, NFTs has a real role to play, underpinned by the blockchain. And again, blockchain's got to survive the Bitcoin fallout, really, hasn't it?
So just a message for DocuSign, if you're watching this, you need to get into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Contractually, I think it's quite interesting stuff.
Yeah, indeed. And
metaverse, I will not comment on.
Well, it's a wait and see. I thought I was kind of throw it in there because it's like I said, they've got a lot of hype this year. So, okay, so on to the fourth one, which is cloud winners and losers. This is going to be interesting.
Well, I've got three obvious candidates and one that's not so obvious, I think. Okay. I sort of lumped them together. There was only in the last month, the American Department of Defense has come out with its, after getting itself into a bit of a twist over the AWS contract a couple of years ago. They re-tendered and they've now got this huge framework contract out, which has got 4 people. Surprise, it's AWS, Azure, GCP. The fourth one in there, which is where you might get the odd was Oracle Compute Infrastructure, OCI.
OCI.
So I see them as winners, and the reason you see them as winners is not particularly because of the value of the contract itself, but I think the message that it sends, both in terms to public sector procurement people anyway, right across the world. And AWS is mopping up in the UK fairly rapidly. But I think more generally to enterprises looking out there going, well, if the American Department of Defense is going cloud, we ought to stop worrying about this. So I think there's a sort of, knock-on effect, I think. But again, it's played right into the hands of the big three, and Oracle are the interesting sort of outsiders in that. And we can, to debate why that's the case. I've actually got a lot of time for technically what they're doing at OCI, notwithstanding some of the relationships or that they've built up with their customers or lack of them over the last few years, and the challenges they've got into. Actually, their technology is interesting on OCI. Right. So I think that's quite good. and obviously, there's a direct correlation into one of the losers I had, which is UK Cloud.
Right.
UK Cloud gone into administration. They were on, various framework agreements, and yet they were finding themselves continuously losing out to AWS and Azure. We can argue that, their management wasn't up to the task, but nonetheless, I think there is a growing challenge to any of the smaller cloud players of getting into these, type of environments. Their markets are getting constrained. I mean, you look at OVH, which I get a lot of time for OVH, which is a French OVH cloud, French cloud company, quite idiosyncratically French, but with a very loyal following in France and certain other, Francophile, countries, but not really breaking out of that, and therefore finding it quite a challenge. So I think the losers, are the sort of second and third tier cloud companies who are, getting squeezed more and more, by the big three. I think that's a problem.
Yeah.
But I also had, I thought, well, let's be a bit, let's poke a few eyes here. I mean, Meta. So we've just done Metaverse.
Ah, yes, we did Metaverse.
Meta, the company. Yeah. I mean, I just wonder whether the hubris is going to unstitch them. I really do. I just, VR is a long way off, virtual reality in terms of day-to-day adoption. And I'm quite certain it will happen, but I have a feeling it won't look anything like Metaverse think it does looks today. Whether they still take advantage of their early position in the market, we shall see, or are they too early and the hubris will get them? It's out for me. I think as it stands at the moment, it's some hype looking for business cases, and I'm not sure about it, to be honest. And you had to throw in Twitter. I mean,
the controversy of Twitter.
The controversy of Twitter. He may prove us right. Elon Musk may prove me wrong completely. But
I think for me, I think Twitter is only the first piece on the board for Elon Musk. I think he's got bigger plans for Twitter and how Twitter is going to look like. There was I was watching some other YouTuber, as you do, and one of the he's actually quite well known. It's I think it's Marcus Branley or something, MKBHD, his name. He does a lot of tech reviews and stuff like that, but he's very well known. He's millions of followers and what have you on YouTube. And there was he made a comment on something, and then Elon Musk actually responded to him directly on it, which is quite interesting. So I'll try and put a link to that particular video in the description, because it was interesting that it kind of revealed a little bit of Elon Musk's hand in terms of what he has in mind for.
I mean, clearly Elon Musk thinks very differently than most of the rest of us. It's just the way his brain works. That's fine. And he may have spotted something, or may have something up his sleeve that really just passes the rest of us by. But at the moment, you're going, well, that's a quick way to kill it.
We'll see. We'll see.
I'm too old for this life.
So I think the only one for me, which was kind of on the winner's side, is really any enterprise. I'm quite happy to lower my bar extremely and standards extremely low for this one. Any enterprise who's really had what I would call a single quote sort of decent cloud strategy. If you're kind of either migrating or looking at sort of approaching cloud as a cloud first sort of thing, or whatever you're doing, then I would say you're kind of losing. You're on the loser side. But if you have a fully realized strategy, or as full as you can be, sort of in that strategy, and I mean by strategy, I mean kind of 5+ years, regardless of who your CTO and who your CIO are today and tomorrow, because they'll probably come and go. But you need to kind of maintain this sort of long-term vision and strategy of how you either migrate into the cloud or sort of start doing sort of greenfield cloud projects. I think that's really essential. And if you are doing that as an enterprise, regardless of your size, I think you're definitely on the winning side of that. So that would be the winner for me. I also have a couple of neutrals, I would say. I can't really say. Maybe we could revisit these next year. So one is the London Stock Exchange Group and doing their deal with Microsoft. I think that's a 10-year deal or something like that. Is that a trend? I mean, that's potentially a trend. You mentioned the was it the Department of Defense? Was it with Microsoft and Intel? So yes, that's an interesting one. We'll see how that's going to go, and what does that actually mean for LSEG in terms of innovation as well for them? Because if you're kind of putting all your eggs in one basket, what does that mean for LSEG and innovation? And then the other one, which I have mentioned before, again, I'll put a link in the description for this. I did a whole talk on this as well recently, is SuperCloud. It's kind of, where is SuperCloud going? Is it actually a thing? Is it going to become a thing? Who's going to dare to go into sort of doing technology and solutions in that way? There's a guy called David Linthicum. I think he's with Deloitte, and he kind of had a presentation. Actually, it was in the last AWS Fest that we did, and he's written an article. Again, I'll try and link those in. And I kind of did maybe a cynical sort of talk around it a couple of months ago. He actually commented on that, which was quite cool. So he liked what I'd done, which was quite cool. So yeah, but SuperCloud, something to look at for next year. Let's see how things develop.
Yeah, interesting one. I saw the article, and I must admit, I'm thinking, like you, I'm neutral on it. I'm thinking, we really need another layer over the top, but I don't know.
Yeah, let's see. I'm definitely interested in SuperCloud from how do you do the technical aspect of it. Right, so let's move on to the final category, which is tech updates. So
why don't you? You're the techie here, so
ooh.
I'm going to make you go.
Not by a stretch of any imagination. Some people are kind of going, "Oh, come on, he's not a techie."
Was he a CTO? What's that?
Yeah, I forgot. It's in my title. Rats. I forgot that bit.
You can't hide. Yes.
No, you can't. So, so for me, it was, again, kind of just being a little bit cynical around Kubernetes. I noticed the latest version, 1.2.6, actually had a name. Now, I don't remember if the previous versions do. Maybe viewers can let me know in the comments section. Correct me on that. Happy to eat my words. But this is the first time I'm actually hearing the name of the version. Now, this is kind of going down a OpenStack sort of path of where you name every release of your project, and history has not really been very kind to the people who talk more than the version numbers of their projects, especially when you kind of get to the second digit after the full stop, after the dot. I'm not sure. So anyway, that was interesting that version 1.2.6 is called electrifying. Okay, fair enough. But I'm always skeptical and kind of do kind of when it comes to, projects being named. I would say just stick to the tech, put in some good, updates into that release, talk about those, talk about how those bring business value. That's the important thing. Don't just get nerdy on the tech and it's great tech and you can play with it. What does it mean in terms of business value to customers and enterprises? So I get worried for open source projects when they start giving names to their releases. So there you go. That's just me. And then the one to watch for next year, we've seen a little bit of it towards maybe the second half of this year. And again, because of the kind of the global financial climates and, interest rates and costs of living going up, energy costs going up and so on, is around FinOps. So FinOps is kind of more, of a framework. There has been some people have actually tried to do stuff with this. So people like Aptio, I think, and Flexera. Don't quote me on those names. And then people like KubeCost have kind of focused more on the Kubernetes clusters. Okay, so we can save you money on your Kubernetes clusters. Great. But you do realize that the cloud environment is more than just the Kubernetes clusters. So I'd like to see that. It seems to be quite fragmented, that space. You've got kind of the theory side with, FinOps.org, and then you got these kind of pockets of people trying to do different things. So I want to see how that progresses into next year. But that was an interesting one. And again, I think even AWS kind of got, confronted a little bit at reInvent around that, because it wasn't really kind of, highlighted enough. Or there were plenty of, I think, talks around it, but it wasn't kind of, highlighted enough maybe in the talks and things like that. And we I certainly mentioned it in the AWS Fest event that I did for December. That was certainly one of the things that I wanted to put out in terms of kind of FinOps being something very important for next year. And I'd like to actually for us to revisit that sometime in a State of Play talk in 2023.
I mean, that's certainly something we've talked about inside Bloor. Colleagues have brought up that FinOps issue and story, and we can see some of the software. You've mentioned a couple of them. There are others out there who are sort of providing, cloud cost optimization as part of the sort of FinOps story. But interesting. We'll do that. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Anything for you?
Anything for me? Yes. So this year for me was interesting is that, observability has come of age, I think, and you and I have had some debates earlier on about observability versus visibility and, was it a thing? And actually the company for me that has got to the heart of what this is, and I think helped, form certainly my view, but also that of the market is Honeycomb. So, hats off to Honeycomb. I think they've done a good job there. And Charity Majors is a very engaging character as the head of Honeycomb IO.
Okay.
But they've got a particular technology or a particular capability now that they call Bubble Up. Because one of the things about observability is you're dealing with unknown unknowns.
Okay.
Whereas monitoring, you're actually monitoring for known issues effectively. Are you
sure that's not AI ops in disguise?
Well,
identifying patterns and making predictions.
Well, I'm just writing what we call a Bloor spotlight on the whole observe, and so a spotlight looks at the issue, the technology, the business and technology issues, without naming any vendors, but looks at one of my points in there is that observability needs AI ops to give it its full power.
Yeah.
So I think we didn't practice that one beforehand, but you're absolutely right. That is, observability tools are great in terms of ingesting and getting stuff but this bubble up idea was really quite fascinating because, as you say, observability comes from the point of view you're looking for unknown behaviors and saying what's the pattern, and therefore there's sort of built-in AI in terms of bubbling that up and then making some predictions. But you're right, AI ops is a key part of that.
Yeah,
the whole bubble up approach that they've taken, I think, is one that will grab people's attention over the coming year. I think as
interesting.
I was also good. So I think observability's had definitely a big breakout year. The other one I wanted to bring up, is, and I'm going to again probably write some more about this in the coming year, is the growth and diversity of specialist chips. For all the sort of wonderful story about the cloud and software defined this and cloud that, and you sometimes forget that however fluffy and wonderful the cloud is, the information lands on a server, on a disk drive, on a network switch somewhere in the world. And
believe it or not, yes, that's what happens.
Exactly, that's what happens. And I won't have a debate now around whether DevOps is genuine or whether it's dev and a little ops, some attack off the back of it. That's for another day. But really, what I wanted to highlight was that the actual complexity of the hardware infrastructure has grown enormously. Whether it's AWS with Graviton, whether it's new ARM processors, whether it's GPUs, graphical processing units, whether it's we've now got data processing units, again, because people have, I got involved earlier in the year looking at the sort of very esoteric world of high frequency trading platforms.
Yeah.
And some of the different infrastructure that they have to put together to make that one really fly is interesting. And you're seeing more and more. Yeah, and so the challenge is going to be that from an architectural point of view, the idea of sort of scale out with x86, type architecture and just more and more and more pizza boxes, if I can put it that way, rapidly being replaced. And you're getting, AI and HPC have very specific requirements, certain latency sensitive have, we're talking about challenges of memory now becoming one of the latency bottlenecks. Unbelievable. If you'd said that, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and yet supercomputers are finding that, they're not, you can spend billions on a supercomputer for you to be able to use 10% of it because you've got memory bottlenecks.
Yeah.
Wow. That's, so again, one of the things that's absolutely fascinating for me is the way in which and again, we're seeing, Intel invest, and if you like, the situation with China has actually exacerbated some of the issues. And so Intel investing in fab, capabilities in the United States, is going to spend a lot of money and different, so I think we're going to see, and those fabs will be quite different in the sense that you're going to have to develop smaller runs of very specialist type of semiconductors. So I think there's quite a lot to come. So I think, yes, we've got so wound up about software development and speed to market that actually understanding the underlying infrastructure is, it's quite complex. It's fascinating and it's delivering an awful lot of the things that we take for granted. But I think it's more and more of a challenge to Moore's law as we go along.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, as a side shoot of that, I think I saw some, I think it was an article, I can't remember, on RISC-V versus ARM. So clearly, things are coming to a head when it comes to, that sort of diversity in the computing space. And the last one, just kind of honorable mention again for me, is in the GitHub space, the Flux project, which is a CNCF project, actually graduating. So we finally have kind of something that's, very much, if those kind of, organizations or enterprises don't want to touch something until it's graduated in terms of, putting it into production. Flux, the Flux CD project, or Flux is graduated from the CNCF. So that is very, very interesting. That's going to make the whole sort of GitOps and DevOps, or GitOps versus DevOps sort of a space interesting for next year. I did ask that question on, again, the AWS Fest December event that I did of one of the speakers, because I'm interested in seeing how those will either fit together or work together. That'll be an interesting one.
Yeah.
Okay, right. So I think we're there. We've done enough ranting, I think, for the Christmas edition, the December edition. So Paul, thank you as always. It's been fascinating and really interesting. Always a great time doing these. The last sort of 6 episodes that we've done have been brilliant. Got lots of good feedback on them. So thank you, and keep that feedback coming. Dear viewers, are really interested in your sort of input. What do you think have been kind of the highlights for you for this year in these categories? Put that in the comments. That would be really cool to hear from you as well. I'll provide again so many of the links I can remember. I think we mentioned a ton of stuff today, so I got my work cut out for me in terms of the links for the will be in the description of the video. More rants in 2023. We may do a kind of a New Year's prediction for the January edition. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you guys for watching, and thank you all for subscribing. It's been really helpful to kind of grow the channel, get feedback from you. So I really do appreciate that. So yeah, last message from Paul, if you want to say something, Paul.
No, I'd just say these have been thoroughly engaging for me as well, and obviously coming from a somewhat different background than you, I think having that sort of conflict, if I can call it that, that background has opened my eyes to a number of things. So I think I've learned a lot through the year as well, just by association. Richard, it's been great. Thoroughly enjoyed it. It's it keeps you fresh. It keeps you fresh, and
Indeed.
Hopefully it keeps everybody who's watching fresh and interested in this market, because it never ceases to amaze. Indeed. I fully agree with that wholeheartedly. So yeah, hope you guys have a great Christmas, and hope you have a prosperous 2023. Bye for now. Thank you for watching this special edition of Cloud State of Play. Please subscribe to the channel and we'll see you next time.